Okay, we're gonna get started. So for this first class, we're not gonna use anything for props other than maybe having a pair of blocks around. I wanna show you an alternative to being on our hands and knees. And then anytime I have my knees on the ground, you're gonna see me putting a blanket underneath them. So that's just kind of a constant prop that I make use of. But I wanna show us and hop into the practice with a little examination of two alternatives to the typical plank pose. So join in with me. We're gonna come onto an all fours pose for a moment. You can turn your toes underneath. And then from here, walk your knees back by a good couple of inches so that when you're in this modification of hands and knees pose, you can begin to catch sight of plank, right? So instead of having the knees directly below the hips, which is just stacking those two joints, when those knees come back, you kick them out a little bit, and then your low core is now tasked with holding you in stability. So as you have this, give it a couple of breaths and just appreciate it that it is a reduction of load bearing on the upper body, but it's still a lot of good work. So that's alternative number one. You can bring your knees back in, and then from being on hands and knees, let's come on to our elbows and knees. So I'm just gonna review these one time on this first class so that you have them as a go-to anytime you want them. So when you come onto your elbows and knees, your palms are going to be facing down. And then from this, walk those knees back again, toes turned under, and then we're gonna lift the legs from the floor. So this, of course, is an alternative for bearing weight on the wrists and hands. Now you're on the elbows. It's no easier. If anything, it's a little bit more difficult in the core, but it's a really great way to take a break from being on the hands. This is a good replacement for that high plank. Obviously, you don't have much else to lower with as far as a low plank is concerned. You can also have your palms facing in towards each other, and of course your palms facing up. And then the other version you could lean into occasionally is to lace the fingers together so you would for headstand. Let's put the knees down behind the hips, and of course you've got a combo of those two, elbows and knees on the floor. All right, and then let's come up from here. And then the one that I want to show you that includes a pair of blocks is just a good alternative for having weight on the hands and wrists. That really only works for the up plank or the high plank position. But it's pretty simple. I use them on their tall ends because I've got long arms, and so this sort of replicates the length of a forearm. If you're a little bit more petite in this arm length, you could go onto the middle height, but I'll show you what I mean. So essentially, I'm just going to use my elbows on the blocks like this. You can give this a try for a moment, just to kind of experiment with it, to know it as an alternative. And once you're here, you can walk the knees back. There's that knee down position again. And then from that, you can try straightening off those legs. So you come into that high plank position. Again, there really isn't anywhere to go from here, so you might just kind of commit to this one as the pose. But let's go ahead and bring the knees on down. So you've got elbows and or knees, and then blocks underneath the forearms in the event that you don't want to be on your hands for a few moments. Okay, so those are a few alternatives. Have them in your back pocket, use them when you need them. But what I'd like us to get into today is answering all the great questions that I always get about plank pose. What is the best way to do it? Where should my fingers point? Where should my elbows point? Should I do this or that with my body? And those are always great questions. And I'm going to try to answer them through kind of my standard setup. And we're going to call that, like, I'm going to use air quotes here, good alignment. And then we're going to throw good alignment out the window and do some with an alternative alignment. So the first one that I offer is going to kind of be like your standard version of, like, what's a baseline plank pose? We're going to do that a couple of times. Let's start from hands and knees. And as you come to your all fours, have your shoulders over your wrists, have your knees underneath your hips, and press the hands down. Spread your fingers, press down from every knuckle into the floor, and open up the spaces between your first finger and your thumbs. That's probably the hardest part, to get some opening there. And then look higher up a little bit. Spy on these wrist creases and see if you can get those wrist creases to face forward towards that front edge of your mat. If they are not, you might turn those hands out a little bit and notice if you can point the index finger on each hand straight forward. Again, this is going to be like if you wanted the master list of how to do plank pose, I'm going to give it to you, but I want you to know it's not a static thought. We change this very often in my classes. So index fingers point forward, wrist creases parallel to the front edge of your mat. Look up even higher. The next landmark I want you to find are those inner elbows, the soft part of the inner elbow. And then can you turn both of those to face forward? All right, let's hop up into a plank. So knees go back, toes are turned under, legs come straight. Now, as you're here, can you recycle through those things? Can you press the fingers down, push your knuckles down, turn the inner elbows to face forward, ensure that your wrist creases are parallel to the front edge of the mat. Now here, pull your shoulder blades down your back, pump your hands down, and spread the shoulder blades apart. Now, if you do that and you hunch your back and drop your head, let's reverse that. Push the base of your skull towards the ceiling, tuck your chin, and pull the sternum forward. Okay, now you've got your sternum pulling forward, but I don't want you to hang your low ribs to the floor. So can you pick up those lowest front ribs and think here about pressing your tailbone and your sacrum down to the floor like you put a weight on your tailbone. Now straighten the legs with that. Don't let the knees buckle and bend. Push into the toes and use those toes pushing off the floor to straighten those legs once more. All right, let's bring the knees on down. Take a pause and take a rest. And we're going to go through that twice more. And again, this is your standard, like if you wanted the master list of how to do a high plank, this will be it. On these next two, we're going to add that elbow bending position, which makes it that high to low plank movement known as Chaturanga in Sanskrit shorthand for a lot of people. So we're going to come back to our all fours. I'm going to push my hands down, flare my fingers open, walk my knees back a couple of inches. Here's that knee down plank position. And it helps me find my core before I just pop up into the pose. And then from here, straight legs. Let's start from behind this time. Push the toes against the floor. Use that to straighten and lift the thighs away from the ground. Push the tailbone towards the floor, but then lift your lowest front ribs away from the mat. So those lowest front ribs like you're tucking in your shirt. But however, then pull your sternum forward at the very top of your chest. Broaden your shoulder blades, pull them down your back, push your hands down, super strong legs, core, tuck your chin, push the base of your skull towards the ceiling, bend your elbows, come halfway down. How straight, how long, how broad. We're gonna come up, now you can come up through kind of like a modified up dog. I'm gonna keep my toes under. And then I'm going to come back into a plank pose. If you could do a straight push-up, awesome, go for it. I don't think I can do one while talking. One more time, let's start from the top to the bottom. Tuck your chin, push your head towards the ceiling from the base of your skull. Every knuckle pressing down. Inner elbows forward, shoulders back, shoulders broad, sternum forward, front ribs in, tailbone under, legs mega straight, toes push. And then down to an elbow bend. Can you maintain those points? And then we'll come up again. I'm just gonna kind of slither my way through those modified up dogs. And then let's go ahead and come on down to our all fours. Take a couple of breaths. I'm gonna throw in a couple little wrist bits, like I could have hung with you, except this was getting fatigued. So what I'd like you to do is to put your fingertips together, have your arms along your side. You could do this seated or standing. I'll just sit in Virasana. And then turn your hands out. So your fingertips are pointing out to the side. Not external rotation, but internal rotation. So turn it in to face back. All right, and then from here, raise your arms up. Not very far. And then arms come on down. We'll do a couple of these. Arms coming out and up, and arms coming down. Now, I don't need to be in the same room with you to know that this is a thing, right? Those shoulders coming up. So pin those shoulders down your back and take those arms up and down. A couple more times. So we internally rotated just to kind of organize the fingers. I'm keeping my fingertips together. And then I'm just going out to the side. Right about here, if I want to take my arms up higher, this has to happen, but we'll skip those shoulder scrunchies because they're no good these days. All right, let's go ahead and come on down. So that's your standard if you ever wanted to know what should I do in plank pose. That was it. However, that's not a static, unyielding dogma. We can do lots of things. Mostly what I want for my students is to understand what their body is doing, right? Because that's yoga, seeing clearly. And so I'm trying to teach from a sense of like, okay, that was your arms doing that. Well, let's do this with the arms. What's that mean? And if any of these are weird, awkward, or need to be modified, you will know that before I do. So please do take care of yourself. We're going to try changing a couple of those cues that we just committed to. So on this next one, start from your all fours. My talking is a little bit of a break for you. And we're going to walk those knees back. Toes are turned under. And then when you're here, walk your hands forward by a good few inches. How's that? Okay, then lift your legs off the floor. So very different than the typical cue where your wrists must be underneath your shoulders. We're gonna have our arms forward. Now, just try it to feel it and find it. I don't feel successful at it, so I'm not gonna commit to it as a full movement. But what does it mean here to bend your elbows? You'd have to drop your forearms to the floor. That's a good one, but we're not gonna commit to it. So just try it like mid-range a couple of times. Elbows bend, elbows straight. All right, bring your knees on down. Bring your hands back into where we typically have them, shoulders width underneath the shoulders themselves. This time go wide. You're gonna take your hands off to the sides. I usually keep my thumbs on the mat. That's about how wide I'm gonna go, but you could come in much wider if you feel like that works for you. And then from here, knees walk back. So we're taking kind of like a step or two into this before we commit to it. And then legs up straight. So your arms are in line with your shoulders. They're just much wider than the shoulders. I kind of love this one. I have to say, it lets me use my pec chest, which isn't like super huge and super strong, but it's like, oh, finally, somebody else is going to help out those little shoulders of mine. All right. How about bending your elbows here? Well, they don't need to bend straight back. They can bend slightly to the side, right? That's your classic push-up. Let's do two more. Elbows bend, come straight. Elbows bend, come straight. All right, knees come on down. Now, let's change the other variable. I'm going to face forward for a second just so you can see what I mean. So typically we have an amount of external rotation on the arms to do this. That's very common for yoga. It's a movement. It's not the best one because there is no best movement. On this next one, I want you to turn your arms in any amount, right? Because we're all gonna feel that one very differently. So as you have your shoulders over your wrists, we're going to, from here, pick up one hand, pick up the other, turn the arms in. You can do this in little baby steps. You don't have to do a big turn in. And then walk the knees back, toes are under, and boop, let's get those legs off the floor. All right, press your hands down. How about pulling your chest forward, pressing into your toes for the straightest legs. And then again, what about a little elbow bend? Elbows go to the sides. Try that a couple more times. Down, whoo, and back up, straight arms. Down, whoo, and back up to straight arms. All right, let's put all three of those together. So back to your knees. And let's walk forward. Let's go wide. And then let's turn in. And because my arms are forward and wide, my internal rotation here is smaller than the one I just did, which is fine. I'm just kind of trying on for size, new arms. All right, am I the only one panting? I hope not. Toes are turned under. And let's straighten those knees. So they're wider than usual, they're more forward than usual, and they're turned in. You wanna try it? Should we go up and down a few times? I say yes. All right, so when you bend your elbows, they go sideways, and then you come back up. When you bend your elbows, they go wide to the sides, and then you push back up. Let's do 3 more, 2 more, and then last one, and then all the way back on up. All right, take a rest, take a break. Let's do backs of the hands together. So I always tip forward to show you this one. I'm just kind of barely crossing my fingertips. And then as I have this, I'm gonna see if I can bring the corners of my thumbs to connect. I'm not gonna keep my elbows on my sides. They gotta come forward with this one. We'll give it a few breaths. And you can think here about doing this up closer towards your chin if your wrists don't flex comfortably. And you might think about taking those hands down your sternum if the wrists do flex comfortably. And again, this is not so much like, well, this one's okay, but this one's much better. It's more like, what does it mean when your body's moving? Can you pay attention? Can you learn and understand? Okay, well, let's play with the feet and leg arrangement here. It's slightly less impactful than the arms. So if that was fatiguing for you, that's probably always going to be true, right? In plank poses, when we change something up here, it's a little bit more intense than when we change something in the legs. But let's get to it. I'm going to go for standard arms. So I'm going to go with wrists under shoulders, inner elbows facing forward. Going to walk those knees back just to give myself a little in-between step. And then back to straight legs like we typically would. I'm gonna drop my head and look. Shoulders with distance. Oh, excuse me, I mean hips with distance with the legs. They look pretty straight. Okay, I'll look forward here. Let's take the feet right next to each other. All right, that's a little change. I kind of like it. Let's go out wide. So legs wider than the mat. I really like this one. This one feels very informative to my hip strength. Well, let's come back to hips with distance and then come onto the tops of the feet. So instead of being on your toes tucked under, if it doesn't work for your ankles, you'll know in a sec. All right, and then back to the toes turned under. Let's cycle through that. Feet together, feet wide, feet to hips with distance, tops of the feet as opposed to toes tucked. All right, toes tucked under, right next to each other, wide off the mat. Oh, back to hips with, tops of the feet rather than toes, and then toes tucked under. All right, let's take a pause. Let's take a rest. What about a child's pose? How about simply sitting for a moment? If the wrists are feeling it, that first one was little bird beak hands, arms turn in, internal rotation, and a slight lift off to the side to elicit some like inner arm, forearm, and wrist stuff. That second wrist exercise with backs of the hands together. All right. We got one more set, one more thought to follow here. This next one will be changing the position of the pelvis and the rib cage. So it's going to sound like, I'm basically going to ask you to make like a scooped out back, a sway back. You're going to lift your tailbone and let your ribs drop forward. If you were on all fours, you would say that that is your cow pose, cow back. And then we're going to think here about tailbone turned under and lifting the ribs from the floor. And you would call that cat back or cat pose. However, when you're in plank, the scope of movement, the scale of movement is going to be smaller. So let me show you rather than say, I'll do both. So if you're in plank and I say something like round your back, a lot of people end up here. Oh, it's starting to look like downward dog. So commit to be in Planksville, even if you feel like the movement is itty bitty. All right, so let's start on the hands. I'm gonna go for standard hands, standard legs with this so I can play with the spine. So as I start things off, hands press, inner elbows forward, shoulders back and down. Gonna walk the knees back a little bit. Toes are turned under. And then let's lift those legs straight, should that be the option you want. All right, in the posture, because this one's kind of easier to grab, I'm going to tuck your tailbone. It's going to feel like you're squeezing your butt max capacity, so do that. But then also think about rounding your low back. Then think about rounding your mid back. So this is my max low back flexion in plank pose. You can see it's not really big, and I'm not in the downward dog. All right, and then kick the tailbone up, drop the ribs, so it just kind of looks like overly extended, overly back bent, cow back. Oh, a couple of times, furiously tuck that tailbone under, lift the ribs from the floor. Oh, kick the tailbone up, hang your belly down. A couple more. I'm gonna do the next couple with my knees down. That's gonna feel better. Tailbone under, tailbone up, under, and up with the tailbone. Okay, last two, I'm gonna go back to plank. So tailbone up to under, whoo, and from under to up, and then from up to under, and then back to kind of neutral. All right, let's come on down for a breath or two. So the last few moments of this, let's take a breath or two. Again, I'm hoping I'm not the only one panting, but you'll have to tell me after class. All right, so this last bit, we're gonna kind of do like a shakedown. So I gave you a bunch of alternative alignments. We're gonna run through all of them, kind of higgledy-piggledy, just kind of throwing a few at you. So if you're somebody who likes to be really organized, you're gonna feel like, what? Why can't she do it in order? But this is neurological training, right? Like consistency is really good, but in a sense of your physicality, it's really healthy to move things around, do them out of order, do them in alternative positions so that you don't get stuck like the only plank is this plank. It's not, right? We've got a whole bunch. So let's start from our all fours. Walk your knees back, toes turned under. And just hang with me, nothing will last here for too long. Come on down to your elbows, palms to the floor. Push your elbows down. And then you're gonna lift your legs up straight. Legs straight, walk your feet out really wide. While they're really wide, can you come onto the tops of the feet? How's that gonna feel? Weird, awkward. And can you come back onto toes tucked under? And can you bring your feet back to their typical positioning? From on your elbows, can you clamber up onto your hands? When you're on your hands, can you keep them at shoulders width distance and turn your hands and arms in? With your hands and arms in, 3 semi push-ups. 1, 2, I'm not going down very deep, and 3, back to straight arms. Bring your knees down, turn your hands to point forward, walk your hands forward, well forward of your shoulders. And then from here, here's your opened plank, your plank with your hands very far forward. I kind of love this one, it's actually easier. My wrists like it too. All right, while you're here, can you take your feet right next to each other? All right, can we do 3 semi push-ups? They're not true push-ups. Elbows bend towards the floor, 1 and 2 and number 3. Back on up. Take your feet to your typical pelvic width distance. Take your hands out wide. Woo! Press your hands down, sternum forward. Right, can you turn your hands in while they're wide? And then 3, bent elbow to straighten. 2, and then last 1, back straight arms. Okay, knees down, hands at shoulders width distance. I don't think we did this one yet. Hands right next to each other. So thumbs next door. This might be the first one of these. All right, here's your plank pose. So close arms, regular legs. All right, hands out wide. 1, 2. Tailbone under. Tuck the tailbone, squeeze the hips. Lift your ribs from the floor. All right, knees come on down. Knees are behind the hips. You still have wide arms. Can you take wide arms and turn them in? And then can we do 3 here? 1, elbow bend to straighten, 2, elbow bend to straighten, and 3, elbow bend to straighten. Hands come back to typical shoulders with distance. All right, last one is your really standard straight up master list if you ever wanted one. Here's my take on it. Legs come straight. Press your knuckles, inner elbows forward. Lift the base of the skull towards the ceiling, chest forward. Tailbone under, ribs lift, toes push, super straight legs. All right, bend the elbows, come up through modified dog position, or if you've got a push-up in you, awesome. Back to plank. All right, 2, elbow bend, lift the chest, or just straight back to plank. And last one, elbow bend, lift the chest, tops of the feet, a modified dog, up dog, and then let's go ahead and stretch on back to a child's pose, or something else in the neighborhood of a child's pose. Give yourself here a few breaths.